Welcome, dear listener, to Radio Night Tales. I am Dreamweaver, and I am here to help you fall asleep by telling you spine-tingling stories with soothing sound of rain. I know you guys use my stories to fall asleep, but wait before you do that, I want you to take a moment to like and subscribe my channel. And also tell in comments what time and place you are listening from. I hope you are done. Great. Now relax yourself and enjoy the stories I have for you.
I remember the first time I saw Ellie Mae Thompson. She was barely 3, twirling in a pink dress that seemed to glow under the Ohio sun. Her giggles filled the air like music you couldn't help but smile at. She was a spark, the kind of kid who made strangers stop and wave. Born on a warm August day in 2014 in Canton, Ohio, Ellie was the only child of Jenna Thompson and Lucas Hayes. Her parents split before she could walk, and Jenna took full custody. Lucas tried to stay in her life, driving up from Akron every chance he got, but it wasn't easy. Jenna was fierce about her independence, and Ellie was her world. At least, that's what everyone thought. Ellie's daycare teachers at Sunny Hills in Canton called her a firecracker. She'd sing made-up songs about butterflies and draw hearts on every scrap of paper. Her favorite thing was painting her nails pink, even if it got messy. But behind her bright eyes, something dark was brewing. Jenna's life wasn't as steady as she let on. She worked long shifts at a diner. In 2017, she'd started dating a man named Travis Boone. He was 28, a warehouse worker, with a quick smile and a temper he kept hidden, at first. Lucas didn't like him, but Jenna brushed it off. "He's good to Ellie," she'd say. Lucas wasn't so sure. It started small. Lucas noticed a bruise on Ellie's arm during a weekend visit. "She fell off her tricycle," Jenna explained, her voice too quick. Lucas let it go, but his gut twisted. A few weeks later, he saw a mark on her back, faint but unmistakable. Jenna said Ellie bumped into a table. Lucas's unease grew, but Jenna shut him down every time he asked. Their fights got louder, and soon Jenna got a court order claiming Lucas was too pushy. It limited his visits to supervised ones, with a social worker watching. Lucas felt helpless, like he was losing his little girl. By late 2017, Ellie's teachers at Sunny Hills in Canton started noticing things too. She showed up with a scrape on her cheek, then a burn on her hand. "Mommy's friend was cooking," Ellie whispered once, her voice small. The staff wrote it down, filing reports with their director. They counted 15 incidents over 6 months. Bruises, cuts, a swollen lip. Jenna always had an excuse. "She's clumsy," she'd say, or "kids play rough." One day Ellie limped in saying, "Mommy pushed me off the couch." Jenna laughed it off, claiming Ellie was making stories. But the teachers weren't laughing. They called the police. The Canton police sent Ellie to a hospital for a checkup. Doctors found old bruises under her clothes, some faded, some fresh. They noted a small burn on her neck, like a cigarette mark. Still, Jenna stuck to her story, and the county's Child Protective Services didn't remove Ellie. They said the home had food, heat, and a bed. Good enough. Lucas begged for custody, showing photos he'd taken of Ellie's injuries, but the courts wouldn't budge. Jenna was her mother, and mothers got the benefit of the doubt. Travis Boone made things worse. Family said he was possessive, always huffing. Ellie's grandmother, Ruth, saw him yell at Ellie once for spilling juice. Ruth told Lucas, who filed another report, but nothing came of it. Jenna stopped letting Ellie see Ruth, saying she was meddling. By early 2018, Jenna pulled Ellie from Sunny Hills and enrolled her at Bright Beginnings, a preschool where Jenna's friend worked. Ellie's new teachers noticed she was quieter, thinner. Her clothes hung loose and she didn't sing anymore. They asked Jenna, who said Ellie was just picky. No one pushed harder. The system kept failing. A social worker visited Jenna's apartment in January 2018, saw a bruise on Ellie's leg, but deemed the home safe. The police closed their case, calling the evidence inconclusive. Lucas's heart sank. He kept calling CPS, but they said they were monitoring. Meanwhile, Ellie's world was closing in. Behind those apartment walls, no one saw the truth. On March 10th, 2018, Travis called 911. His voice was flat, almost bored. "My girlfriend's kid fell off a chair. She's not breathing right." Jenna grabbed the phone, saying, "I checked her nose, no air." The dispatcher told them to do CPR, but the line went quiet. Paramedics arrived at a scene that stank of bleach. Ellie's bed had no sheets, just a thin blanket soaked in urine. Torn court papers from Lucas's custody fight littered the trash. The fridge held a single pizza box, half empty. Ellie lay on the floor, dressed in a heavy coat, despite the chilly spring day. An air conditioner hummed, blasting cold air. Her body was stiff, her lips dry and cracked. One eye was swollen shut, a deep bruise blooming across her cheek. Cuts and burns dotted her skin, some scabbed, some raw. Her knees had sores, like she'd been stuck in one spot for days. She weighed just 25 pounds, her bones sharp under her skin. Rigor mortis told the medics she'd been gone for hours. Jenna and Travis said Ellie fell that morning, hit her head. But Jenna's brother Nate told police something else. A month earlier, he'd seen Ellie lying still on a couch, barely moving. "Is she okay?" he asked. Jenna shrugged. "She's not eating much." Nate didn't call anyone, scared of starting trouble. He regretted it now. Police arrested Jenna and Travis that day. Jenna's interrogation was a mess of stories. She said Ellie got sick after eating at a burger joint, vomiting for days. She claimed she gave her soup and medicine, but Ellie faked it. She even said Ellie scared herself sick. Then she pointed at Travis, saying he's the one who fed Ellie, not her. Travis stayed quiet, just staring at the table. An autopsy painted a grim picture. Ellie died from a brain bleed caused by repeated blows to the head. A stroke had paralyzed her right side weeks before, slurring her speech. Her body showed starvation. Her stomach was empty, her organs shrinking. Ulcers lined her gut, and her lungs had collapsed. The coroner ruled it homicide, caused by blunt trauma and neglect. CCTV footage sealed their fate. The night before Ellie died, Jenna and Travis were at a taco shop, laughing over burritos. Later, they hit a dollar store, buying bleach and snacks. Ellie was home, dying alone. At trial in April 2019, 38 witnesses, teachers, medics, Lucas, laid bare the horror. Jenna sat stone-faced, even as photos of Ellie's broken body flashed on the screen. Lucas sobbed, recounting how his vibrant girl faded under Jenna's care. He blamed the system, too, for ignoring his pleas. The jury didn't take long. Jenna, 26, got life without parole. Travis, 29, got life with a chance of parole after 22 years. The judge called their cruelty beyond comprehension. Lucas sued Stark County CPS, claiming they ignored Ellie's cries for help. He won $2.8 million in 2021, forcing policy changes. Sunny Hills and Bright Beginnings shut down. Ellie's funeral was on March 18, 2018, at Grace Church in Canton. Her tiny pink coffin rode in a horse-drawn cart, a crown of flowers on top. Lucas spoke of her love for dancing, her laugh like bells. The community packed the pews, vowing no child would be forgotten again. Travis appealed his sentence in 2023, but it was denied. Ellie's story still haunts Canton, a reminder of what happens when no one listens.
Hope you enjoyed the story. Now let's hop on to the next one. I can still see Lily Grace Carter's smile in my mind, that toothless grin lighting up the room. She was born on a crisp September morning in 2023 in Hawesville, Kentucky, the youngest of 4 kids to parents Marissa Carter and Ethan Holt. They called her Sunny because her giggles were like a warm breeze. Her siblings, 2 girls and a boy, the oldest just 7, adored her. Lily's big brother, only a year older, would make funny faces to get her to laugh. By 8 months, she was almost crawling, her hazel eyes sparkling with curiosity. She loved grabbing at her sister's hair and chewing on soft toys. From the outside, the Carter-Holt family seemed full of love, but inside, danger was already creeping in. Marissa and Ethan got married in 2016, a year before their first daughter came along. They lived in a rundown trailer in Cloverport, a small community 20 miles from Owensboro. The neighbors didn't take kindly to them. People whispered about their loud arguments and the way Ethan peeled out of the driveway in his beat-up truck. Marissa's family had a rap sheet. Her dad, Carl Carter, had done time for drug possession, and her mom, Lila, had skipped court on theft charges across the Indiana border. Ethan's folks weren't much better. His dad, Ronnie Holt, had a string of DUIs, and his mom, Tammy, got caught shoplifting twice. The family wasn't all bad, but Marissa and Ethan seemed to gravitate toward trouble. Lily's older siblings had been taken away before. CPS stepped in when the kids showed up at school with dirty clothes and empty stomachs. They went to live with Marissa's sister, Tara, but Lily stayed with her parents. Social services flagged Lily early. Her umbilical cord tested positive for meth at birth. They started the process to remove her, but Marissa and Ethan dodged every call, every visit. CPS tried reaching their relatives, but no one would help. The Kentucky Cabinet for Health and Family Services could have called in state police, but they didn't. That delay would cost everything. In November 2023, a guy named Derek Vance moved into a camper on their property. He was a friend of Ethan's, rough around the edges, with a record for drug possession in Indiana. Marissa's dad, Carl, was crashing there too. The trailer wasn't just a home, it was a hub. Marissa and Ethan were running drugs, meth mostly, with Derek and Carl helping. Lily was right there, surrounded by pipes and pills. A court order banned the older kids from the house after drugs showed up in their hair tests, but Marissa ignored it. Lily stayed in that chaos, her crib inches from baggies of crystal. The Kentucky State Police were cracking down hard that summer. Operation Bluegrass Heat swept through every county, nabbing over 250 dealers by July 2024. They seized drugs worth nearly $700,000, plus guns and cash. Marissa and Ethan weren't careful. They had drugs mailed straight to their trailer through the Postal Service. A drug dog sniffed out a package for Derek in May, a half-pound of meth. Police set up a sting, delivering it to the Cloverport address. When Derek grabbed it, they cuffed him. He already had a warrant for unpaid child support, but the drug charges were heavier. His bond was set at $40,000. Lily was last seen by Tara in March 2024. By early June, Tara heard from Lila that CPS had taken Lily. She didn't buy it and called for a welfare check. Police showed up, but Marissa and Ethan were gone. Lila swore her daughter said CPS had Lily on May 1st, but there was no record. Derek's arrest got police thinking. Drugs and a missing baby in the same house? They connected the dots. On June 5th, police found Marissa, Ethan, and Carl at a cheap motel in Owensboro. The room, booked under Ethan's name, was a mess. Meth pills on the bed, a glass pipe by Carl, and more drugs in Marissa's bag. They all claimed they didn't know where Lily was. Police arrested them for child abandonment and drug possession, slapping each with a $25,000 bond. The next day, they added charges for organized crime and trafficking. Carl got an extra hit for illegal gun possession as a felon. On June 8th, they nabbed Tammy Holt at her place. She had an old warrant for assault. Another guy, Nate Walsh, got arrested there trying to hide pills under a car. Finding Lily was urgent. Police searched the woods behind the trailer, a nearby graveyard, even brought in cadaver dogs. Neighbors joined in, despite their dislike for Marissa and Ethan. They didn't know about Lily, but they wanted her found. On June 13th, police went back to Marissa's parents' place with a warrant. Lily wasn't there, but Carl and Lila were arrested for outstanding charges. Their phones were seized, and Lily's siblings were sent to Tara. Marissa and Ethan kept saying CPS had Lily, sending police on a wild goose chase. The community was rattled. This wasn't the safe place they thought. On June 14th, a week after Lily went missing, police returned to the trailer. In the front room, under some junk, they found a navy duffel bag. My heart sunk as they unzipped it. Lily was inside, her tiny body too decomposed to recognize. She was taken to Louisville for an autopsy. The trailer was a nightmare. Filth, drugs, and guns everywhere. Police had to sanitize it before searching, worried their own would overdose from residue. It took multiple warrants to make it safe. 8 people were arrested in the sweep: Marissa, Ethan, Carl, Tammy, Derek, Nate, and 2 others tied to the drugs. 4 faced charges for Lily's death: Marissa, Ethan, Carl, and Derek. The coroner couldn't pin down Lily's cause of death. Her body was too far gone, but they found 22.7 nanograms of meth in her system. They called it homicide, pointing to neglect and exposure. Tara set up a GoFundMe for Lily's funeral, held July 20th, 2024, at Owensboro Memorial Chapel. It had music, prayers, a sermon, archived online. Marissa sobbed in court as charges piled up, 10 for her, 13 each for the men, including gun charges for the felons. By January 2025, DNA evidence tightened the noose. Police added murder charges for all 4, plus abuse counts for Lily and her siblings. Carl got a hit for repeat offender charge. They pled not guilty, held on $200,000 bonds each. Marissa's lawyer pushed to retest evidence. Ethan's hearing was delayed to March. Trials are set for April and May. Kentucky's system faced heat. The Ombudsman lost access to a key database, ITWIST, when it moved to the Auditor's Office in July 2024. They sued and won it back by September. A man named Caleb Reed, no relation to Lily, started a petition for Lily's Law after her death. It demands parents who've lost custody can't keep newborns without proof of change. It got 9,000 signatures fast. Representative Lila Dawson backed House Bill 612, passed by committee in February 2025, pushing for mandatory reporting of at-risk parents. Lily's siblings are now with Tara and her partner Luke, who vowed to give them a good life. Lily's smile haunts me. She deserved better. Her tiny voice, silenced too soon, sparked a cry for change.
Hope you enjoyed the story. Now let's hop on to the next one.
I close my eyes, and I can still hear the laughter of the Harper kids echoing through their old neighborhood in Salem, Oregon. They were a lively bunch, full of energy despite the weight of their world. The mother, Liana Harper, was 29 when it all happened. Her husband, Marcus Wells, was 50, a man with a past that clung to him like a shadow. They had 4 kids together, each one special in their own way. The oldest, Jeremiah, was 8 in the summer of 2011, a whiz at building Lego towers he'd proudly gift to his classmates. Next was Caleb, 7, who could read books way above his grade and loved Thomas the Train. 6-year-old Noah was all about action figures. Batman was his hero. and he'd race Hot Wheels cars across the kitchen floor. Little Grace, just 3, was the only girl, clutching her teddy bear and babbling about princesses. All 4 had special needs, and Liana, who battled bipolar disorder, poured her heart into them. But their home at 814 Oak Street wasn't the safe haven it seemed. Liana and Marcus met at a trade school in Fresno, California, years before. She was fresh out of the army, full of dreams. Marcus was older, charming, carrying a heavy secret. Back in 1990, he'd served 18 years for assaulting his ex-wife's daughters. He pleaded guilty to 7 counts of abuse against kids under 14, a stain that followed him even after parole. Liana knew, but her brother, Nate, said Marcus had paid his price. She believed in second chances. They married, had kids, and moved to Oregon to escape his past. First, they settled in Albany, but Marcus lost his job at a mill and they were evicted. By 2010, they landed in Salem, where Liana enrolled in community college and Marcus fixed cars out of their garage. Neighbors noticed the yelling, though. Sharp, angry fights that spilled into the night. The cracks were showing long before that July. CPS had been called to their house twice, though no one knew why. Liana told friends she was done with Marcus, tired of his control. She wanted out, but leaving wasn't easy with 4 kids. On Saturday, July 16, 2011, neighbors heard a bad one. A screaming match that shook the windows. Liana stayed out all night. Marcus called police early Sunday saying she was missing. Salem PD found her at a corner store by 8 a.m. Calm, buying cheap cigars. She was in a gray hoodie and jeans, texting on her phone, smiling as she left with the cops. They drove her home at 9:10 a.m. She didn't seem scared, just tired. An hour later, smoke curled from the Harper house. Neighbor Tom Riley banged on the door, shouting, but got no answer. He dialed 911. Firefighters arrived to a locked house, deadbolts on the front, a chair jammed against the back door. Smoke poured out, thick and black. They broke in, finding flames licking the walls in 3 spots. The living room couch was ablaze, and the kitchen reeked of oil. It was arson, no doubt. 16 minutes after the call, they pulled the first body out. By 9:40 a.m., the front yard was a grim scene. Paramedics pumping chests, cutting clothes, searching for pulses. Liana and the kids were gone. Marcus was the only one they found alive, barely, clutching a bloody knife in the master bedroom. The kids were all in that room. 2 on the bed, 2 on a mattress on the floor, next to Liana. Autopsies told a brutal story. Marcus had dosed them with melatonin. Grace had 5 times the normal amount, enough to knock them out cold. Liana had 12 stab wounds, 3 to her neck, 9 to her chest. Jeremiah and Noah were stabbed too, deep gashes in their sides. Grace and Caleb died from the fire, their lungs full of smoke. Liana, Jeremiah, and Noah bled out. No defensive wounds on Liana. She didn't fight back. The first stab likely killed her. Marcus had dragged them all to the bedroom, doused the house with vegetable oil, thinking it would burn faster, and turned on the stove. He tried to end himself with a second knife, but passed out from the smoke. Firefighters saved him. Police zeroed in on Marcus fast. He was in the hospital for 3 weeks, unconscious, guarded by cops. When he woke, they cuffed him. At his first court appearance, he wore a green jumpsuit, eyes hollow. He claimed Liana did it, said she came home raving, admitted to waking up in another man's bed, drugged. He said he found her standing over the kids with a knife, so he attacked her to stop it. "I didn't kill my babies. She was broken. I failed them," he told detectives, voice cracking. But the evidence screamed otherwise. The oil, the locked doors, the melatonin, it was planned, not a snap decision. His trial started in March 2012. He faced 22 counts of aggravated murder, plus arson and manslaughter. His lawyer, Greg Tate, tried to pin it on Liana's mental health, but the facts were crushing. 35 witnesses, firefighters, neighbors, Liana's sister Mara, painted a picture of a jealous man unraveling. Prosecutors showed photos of the kids' toys, charred in the rubble. They played the 911 call, Tom's voice frantic. Liana's dad, Calvin Wells, took the stand, voice shaking. He'd never met Grace in person, only heard her call him Papa on the phone. He'd reconnected with Liana months before, planning a visit. Now he blamed himself for not coming sooner. He spat at Marcus's defense, saying the prison system failed by letting Marcus out years before. He was a monster then, and he's a monster now, Calvin said. Marcus's story didn't hold. The melatonin showed intent. The knife in his hand wasn't Liana's. Prosecutors called his tale delusional, a desperate bid to dodge shame. The jury saw through it. In April 2012, Marcus entered an Alford plea to 4 counts of aggravated murder and 1 of arson, admitting the evidence would convict him without saying he did it. It spared him the death penalty. The judge gave him life without parole, calling it a coward's crime. Calvin walked out, clutching a photo of Liana and Grace, tears streaking his face. The community reeled. Salem held a vigil for the Harpers, candles flickering outside the burned house. Jeremiah's teacher spoke of his Lego gifts. Caleb's librarian remembered his love of stories. Noah's daycare worker brought a Batman figure, placing it by a photo of his grin. Grace's tiny shoes, found in the ashes, sat on a makeshift altar. Liana's sister, Mara, started a fund for kids with special needs, named after them. It's still running today. Marcus appealed in 2014, claiming a bad trial, but the Oregon Appeals Court shut it down. He's still at Snake River Correctional, a ghost in a cell. Calvin sued California's parole board, arguing they should have kept Marcus locked up in the 90s. He settled for $1.2 million in 2015, pushing tighter offender laws. Liana's family didn't want Marcus dead. They wanted him to live with his guilt, rotting behind bars. I think of Grace's teddy bear, probably clutched tight that night. Those kids deserved to grow up. Liana deserved to escape. Their voices are gone, but Salem hasn't forgotten.
Hope you enjoyed the story. Now let's hop on to the next one.
I can still picture Nora Evans, her bright smile cutting through the gray Minnesota winters. She was 28, a ray of light in St. Paul, always ready with a kind word or a quick laugh. Born on a snowy December day in 1984, she grew up in a tight-knit family, the middle kid of 3. She worked at a bookstore in the Mall of America, shelving novels and chatting with customers like they were old friends. Her passion was photography, snapping candid shots of strangers in the park, capturing their joy. In 2010, she married Daniel Brooks, a 30-year-old mechanic with a quiet charm. They settled into a small house on Cedar Avenue, dreaming of a family. But by early 2013, cracks were showing. Nora was texting someone new, a guy named Ryan, and Daniel wasn't blind to it. It was February 22, 2013, when everything fell apart. Nora and Daniel went to the mall for dinner, a Friday night routine. She was glued to her phone, thumbs flying as she texted Ryan. Daniel asked who it was, his voice tight, but Nora brushed him off. Just a friend, she said, eyes on her screen. They got home around 10 p.m., the air between them heavy. Nora kept texting, even as they climbed into bed. Daniel's patience was fraying, his hurt turning to anger. At 11:50 p.m., her messages stopped. The silence was deafening. The next morning, Daniel called police at 8:30 a.m., voice steady. He said, "My wife didn't come home last night. She left after dinner, maybe to meet friends." St. Paul PD started digging. Nora's sister, Claire, said it wasn't like her to vanish. She always checked in. Her phone was off, her social media dead. Daniel's story felt off. He was too calm, too vague. Police checked their house, finding nothing obvious, no blood, no mess, but a neighbor's security camera changed everything. The camera panned the street, catching their house on the edge of its frame. Reviewing it was brutal. Hours of snow-blurred footage, the lens sweeping left to right. At 2:15 a.m., a car crept into view, reversing toward the house. It was hard to see, the snow thick, but it looked like Nora's blue Honda. By 9:10 a.m., the Honda drove off, just as Daniel said. No clear shot of the driver. Then, luck turned. A mall employee spotted Nora's car in a parking ramp untouched for days. A tow truck driver was called, but he froze when he saw red smudges on the door. He called police. In the grass nearby, they found the trunk liner, stained with blood. DNA confirmed it was Nora's. The case wasn't missing persons anymore. It was murder. Bloomington PD joined St. Paul, pulling mall footage. At 9:50 a.m. on February 23rd, Nora's Honda entered the lot. Minutes later, a man walked out, heading to a taxi stand. The video was grainy, but his hoodie had a bold logo, maybe a sports team. He took a cab, and GPS tracked it to a block near Daniel's house. Back at the neighbor's footage, a taxi appeared at 10:45 a.m., rolling past their street. A figure in a logoed hoodie walked toward the house, pausing at the front door. It was enough to make Daniel the prime suspect. Police got a warrant for the house. It looked normal, cozy even. But under the bed, they found a dried stain. More spots on the mattress. Luminol lit up the carpet like a crime scene map. Blood in the bedroom, hall, kitchen, down the stairs. All Nora's. Daniel's USV had no blood, but a gas station receipt from 8 a.m. that day raised flags. Why didn't he mention it? Footage from the station showed him filling up, grabbing cash from an ATM, wearing that same logoed hoodie. His face was clear as day. Daniel was brought in, lips sealed. "I want my lawyer," he said, stone cold. Without Nora's body, charging him was tricky. Then, in May 2013, a kayaker found her in the Mississippi River near a bend 5 miles from home. No clothes, just a body battered by the current. Her forehead was a gash, her left thumb broken, fresh, no healing. The coroner said she'd been suffocated. The head wound and broken thumb from a struggle. The pieces fell into place. Detectives built the story. Nora's texting drove Daniel over the edge. He'd asked about it at dinner, got nothing. At home, he snapped, grabbing her arm, breaking her thumb as he yanked her phone. When she wouldn't talk, he hit her with a heavy mug, splitting her forehead. Then, in a rage, he smothered her with a pillow. Panic set in. He dragged her to the Honda, stuffed her in the trunk, and drove to the river, dumping her in the dark. At dawn, he hit the gas station, got cash, parked her car at the mall, and took a cab home, acting like nothing happened. The trial started in October 2013. Daniel's defense claimed Nora left willingly, maybe attacked by someone else. But the blood, the footage, the hoodie, it was airtight. Claire testified, sobbing about Nora's love for life, her photos still hanging in her apartment. The jury saw the mall footage, the taxi GPS, the bloodstains glowing under luminol. Daniel's calm 911 call chilled the room. On November 20th, 2013, he was convicted of second-degree murder, sentenced to 26 years. Nora's family held a memorial at her favorite park, scattering her ashes where she'd photographed kids playing. Claire kept her camera, vowing to finish Nora's projects. Daniel appealed in 2015, claiming the footage was unclear, but it was denied. He's at Stillwater Prison, eligible for parole in 2036. St. Paul put up a bench for Nora, engraved with her name and "Capture the Light." Her smile still lingers, but so does the pain of a life stolen too soon.
Hope you enjoyed the story. Now let's hop on to the next one.
I can still hear the echo of Sarah Mitchell's laugh, the kind that made you feel like everything was going to be okay. She was 48, a woman who seemed to have it all in Pleasant Grove, Utah. Born in 1959, she grew up in a small Idaho town, winning beauty pageants and charming everyone with her warmth. She'd modeled in her 20s, even spent a year as an exchange student in Denmark. Sarah met James Larson at a church event in 1980, and they eloped 6 months later. They built a life that looked perfect: 4 kids, a big house, and a reputation as the ideal Mormon family. James, a doctor, was a pillar in the community, even serving as an LDS bishop. Sarah was the glue, always there for her kids, volunteering at school, singing lullabies to her grandkids. But behind closed doors, their marriage was a battlefield, and Sarah's last days were shadowed by a secret she couldn't shake. By 2007, Sarah and James had 8 kids, 4 biological, 4 adopted. Rachel, 24, was a med student. Vanessa, 22, a teacher. Caleb, 20, a college sophomore. And Lily, 16, a high school junior. The adopted kids, Marina, Sophia, and Emma from Russia, and Ava, their granddaughter, ranged from 12 to 5. The family was admired, but tension simmered. Sarah caught James with explicit videos years back. Each time she confronted him, he'd threatened to hurt himself, guilting her into silence. She buried it, keeping up the facade for the kids and the church. But when James hit 50 in 2006, he changed. He obsessed over his looks, tanning, lifting weights, doing push-ups mid-conversation. Rachel noticed at first, thinking it was a midlife crisis. Sarah wasn't so sure. In February 2007, Sarah stunned the family. "I'm getting a facelift," she said. James pushed for it, calling it a gift. Sarah, who'd always embraced her age, seemed uneasy but agreed. Rachel went with her to the consultations, meeting Dr. Paul Reed. Sarah wavered, wanting to wait for summer when Rachel could help with recovery. James insisted. "Rachel's spring break is soon. Do it then." The surgery was scheduled for March 27. Post-op, Sarah wasn't herself, drowsy, weak, barely eating. Rachel checked her meds, heavy sedatives, prescribed by a doctor. They seemed legit, but Sarah's behavior got stranger. Blindfolded by bandages, she'd ask Rachel to hand her pills so she could feel them, like she didn't trust what she was taking. One night, Sarah pulled Rachel aside, tears soaking her bandages. "If something happens to me, make sure it wasn't your dad," she whispered. Rachel's stomach dropped. Sarah suspected James was cheating, maybe worse. She said he'd been slipping her extra pills, making her foggy. Rachel brushed it off as pain meds talking, but the fear in her mother's voice stuck. Sarah got better, and Rachel returned to med school after spring break, hoping it was just paranoia. A week later, on April 4th, 2007, James called Rachel, frantic. "Your mom's in the tub. She's not breathing," he yelled, then hung up. Ava, their 5-year-old granddaughter, had found Sarah slumped in the bathtub, screaming for James. He sent Ava to the neighbors, then dialed 911, his voice a mess. "She's unconscious, underwater," he gasped. The operator begged him to calm down, guiding him through CPR. The line cut out twice, leaving her scrambling to trace the address, 3005 Elm Street. Paramedics arrived, but Sarah was gone. The hospital called it a heart attack. Rachel flew home, reeling. Rachel couldn't accept it. Sarah's last words haunted her. While James was out, she checked the pill bottles. Every one empty. Caleb's girlfriend, Mia, admitted James had her flush them after the hospital, saying they hurt too much to see. Rachel's suspicions grew. Sarah shared James's phone login months before. Rachel found a number he'd called endlessly, Tessa Morgan. Texts and call logs suggested an affair. When Rachel confronted James, he snapped, shoving her against a wall, his eyes cold. She didn't tell anyone about the assault, too shaken, but it convinced her Sarah was right about him.
Rachel and her Aunt Clara, Sarah's sister, went to police, demanding a new look at Sarah's death. The autopsy showed no foul play, just heart issues, so cops dismissed them. James's behavior didn't help his case. He rushed the funeral, barring Sarah's family. At the service, he droned about himself, barely mentioning Sarah. Then he introduced Tessa as the kids' new caretaker. Rachel saw it. Tessa wasn't just a nanny. 3 months later, James proposed to her, planning to send the younger kids to Idaho for adoption. Rachel started documenting everything: James's mood swings, Sarah's fears, the empty bottles. She filed a report, including the assault. This time, Utah County Police listened, handing it to a special team. They didn't know James and Tessa were hiding something darker. In June 2007, James sent Marina to Russia, claiming she'd reconnect with family. A year passed, no return. Clara sent her daughter Ellie to check. Ellie found Marina in a slum, waiting for James to come back. At the U.S. airport, officials stopped them. Marina's social security number was tied to Tessa, now Marina Larson, married to James on April 4th, 2007, Sarah's funeral day. The investigation exploded. James's past unraveled. His medical degree? Fake. Built on forged transcripts. In his 20s, he'd served 6 months for check fraud, then violated parole by enrolling in med school. He'd faked a military stint, claiming disability benefits for 25 years while posing as a doctor. Police called him a con man. James and Tessa got 4 years for identity theft and fraud. Rachel kept pushing for Sarah's case, leaning on Ava's memory. Ava, now 6, drew Sarah in the tub, on her back, eyes open, water red. Neighbors confirmed the water was pinkish. James said Sarah was face down, slipped. No one backed him. More came out. Former patients accused James of coercion. He'd job hop when questioned, dragging the family across states. A woman, Lisa Holt, his old fling, said he bragged about a natural way to kill, undetectable post-heart attack. The toxicology report raised alarms. Sarah had 4 sedatives: oxycodone, lorazepam, diphenhydramine, and zolpidem. Zolpidem, meant for sleep, lingered too long in her system. Dr. Reed admitted James pushed for extra meds, trusting him as a colleague. Paramedics noted pink foam in Sarah's lungs, suggesting drowning, not a heart attack. James's CPR claims seemed shaky. He was a doctor, but no water was cleared. Inmates from James's fraud stint gave more. One said James called his marriage dead and hinted the facelift was a cover. His 911 calls sounded staged, evasive, cutting off. Letters to Tessa showed obsession, a man desperate to erase his family. On August 20th, 2012, James was arrested for Sarah's murder. The trial, starting October 2013, was a spectacle, a bathtub prop in court, a first. Ava's drawing, Dr. Reed's testimony, and the glowing luminol stains convicted him. On September 10th, 2014, he got 15 years to life, plus 3 for assaulting Rachel. He took his life in prison on April 5th, 2017. Rachel became Dr. Mitchell, adopting Marina, Sophia, and Emma. She uses Sarah's maiden name, honoring her. Sarah's laugh lives on, but the cost of truth was steep.
Well, my dear listeners, that's all I had for tonight. I hope you enjoyed the stories. Now please relax yourselves and let the land of dreams wrap you while you listen to the sound of rain. Good night. I will see you again tomorrow.